Hey guys, tonight you're a 10-year-old boy being dragged from your burning village by Ming soldiers. Your father's blood is still warm on your hands from trying to shield you. We'll get to why Emperor Yongle needs you castrated before dawn. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations. You've just been born in early 15th century China, and your family is so poor they eat tree bark soup for dinner. Your father owes money to half the village. Your mother died giving birth to your little sister, and the only valuable thing your family owns is you. Specifically, your ability to be castrated and sold to the imperial palace as a future eunuch. It's 1403. The Yongle Emperor has just seized the throne in a bloody civil war, and he's building the most elaborate imperial court in Chinese history. He needs thousands of castrated boys to staff his palaces, and your genitals are unfortunately perfect for his requirements. You live in Heijian, a desperately poor region south of Beijing, where the soil is too salty to grow anything decent. The land looks like someone sprinkled it with poison and then forgot to water it for a decade. Your neighbors survive by sending their sons to be castrated, because apparently having your 8-year-old's penis chopped off is considered a reasonable career path in early Ming Dynasty China. The local economy literally depends on producing eunuchs. It's like a medieval assembly line, except instead of manufacturing cars, you're manufacturing sexually mutilated children for the emperor's entertainment. Your father has been watching you grow up, not with paternal pride, but with the calculating eye of a livestock dealer evaluating his best calf. You're reasonably healthy. You can walk without falling over most of the time, and you haven't died of any major diseases yet. In the brutal mathematics of imperial service, this makes you premium eunuch material. The fact that you're still attached to your genitals is seen as a temporary inconvenience, not a permanent feature of your anatomy. The decision has already been made. Your father spent last night drinking rice wine and crying, which you initially thought was about your mother, but was actually about the money he owes the local moneylender. By morning, he'd worked up the courage to visit the purification master, the local expert in child castration who lives in the nice house at the end of the village. The purification master has been castrating boys for 30 years, learned the trade from his father, and will probably teach it to his son. It's a hereditary profession, passed down like a family recipe, except instead of making dumplings, they're making eunuchs. The purification master examines you like you're a horse he's considering buying. He checks your teeth, feels your arms for muscle tone, and makes you walk across the room to ensure your legs work properly. He's not being cruel, exactly. He's being professional. A boy who dies during castration is a financial loss for everyone involved. Your father doesn't get paid, the purification master loses his reputation, and the emperor doesn't get his eunuch. It's a lose-lose-lose situation that everyone wants to avoid. The procedure will cost your father the equivalent of 2 months' income, which he doesn't have, so he's essentially selling you to pay for your own castration. It's the kind of financial arrangement that makes absolutely no sense until you realize that a successfully castrated boy can earn more in the imperial palace than your entire family makes in a year. If you survive the procedure, if you don't die of infection, and if you're selected for palace service, you might eventually send money back to your family. It's a series of ifs built on top of having your genitals removed with a rusty knife. But in early 15th century China, it's considered a reasonable investment strategy. The purification master explains the process to your father in the same tone someone might use to discuss roof repairs. First, you'll be tied to a special chair with a hole in the seat. Your thighs and abdomen will be bound tightly to prevent excessive bleeding. Then your genitals will be washed with pepper water, which sounds refreshing, until you realize it's meant to numb the area before someone cuts off your penis and testicles with a curved blade. The entire procedure takes about 10 minutes, assuming nothing goes wrong. If something goes wrong, it takes about 10 minutes plus however long it takes you to die. The survival rate is roughly 90%, which sounds encouraging until you do the math and realize that 1 out of every 10 boys bleeds to death or dies of infection. Your father nods thoughtfully, as if these are acceptable odds for a risky business venture, rather than his 8-year-old son's life. The purification master mentions that he's personally castrated over 300 boys in his career, and only lost about 30 of them. He says this like it's a professional achievement, rather than a confession to multiple homicides. After the cutting, a bamboo tube will be inserted into what remains of your urethra to allow urination while you heal. You'll be kept in bed for several weeks, during which time you'll either recover or die. The purification master recommends that your family prepare both celebrations and funeral arrangements, just in case. He's learned from experience that it's better to be prepared for either outcome than to be caught off guard by success or failure. The entire transaction has the casual efficiency of buying vegetables at market. Your father hands over the money. The purification master schedules your castration for next Tuesday, and everyone discusses the weather, while you stand there wondering why the adults are talking about your penis like it's a commodity they're planning to trade. You don't fully understand what castration means, but you can tell from the way everyone avoids eye contact that it's probably not going to be fun. Meanwhile, 300 miles away in Beijing, the Yongle Emperor is planning the most elaborate imperial complex in human history. The Forbidden City will eventually house over 20,000 eunuchs, all of them boys who went through exactly what you're about to experience. The Emperor needs castrated servants, because regular men can't be trusted around the imperial women. Eunuchs can't father children who might threaten the dynasty, and they can't seduce the emperor's concubines because their equipment has been permanently removed. The Yongle Emperor has very specific requirements for his eunuchs. They need to be young enough to be trained properly, healthy enough to survive the brutal palace lifestyle, and completely without sexual capability. The castration process ensures the last requirement, while also creating a class of men who are entirely dependent on imperial favor for their survival. A eunuch can't leave palace service and start a family. His only option is to serve the emperor until death, which makes eunuchs remarkably loyal employees. Your future emperor is not a gentle man. He seized power by defeating his nephew in a civil war that killed hundreds of thousands of people. He's currently planning military campaigns against Mongolia, massive construction projects that will consume the lives of countless workers, and naval expeditions that will project Chinese power across the known world. He's also planning to staff his palaces with an army of castrated boys, because apparently having your genitals removed is a prerequisite for imperial employment. The emperor's harem will eventually contain thousands of women from across Asia. Korean girls, Vietnamese beauties, Mongol princesses, and Chinese concubines will all be housed in the inner palace under the supervision of eunuchs. The entire system depends on having sexually neutralized men to manage sexually active women, which requires a steady supply of castrated boys. Your penis is basically a supply chain management problem for the imperial household. But let's talk about what happens next Tuesday, when you'll be introduced to the Purification Master's special chair. The chair has been used for hundreds of castrations, and it's stained with the blood of all the boys who sat in it before you. The hole in the seat allows access to your genitals, while keeping you restrained and positioned for the procedure. You'll be tied down so tightly that you won't be able to move, which is probably for the best, since most boys tend to thrash around when someone starts cutting off their private parts. The Purification Master will heat his knife over a fire before beginning the procedure. This isn't for sterilization, since no one in early 15th century China understands germ theory. He heats the blade because hot metal cauterizes blood vessels as it cuts, reducing bleeding and theoretically improving your chances of survival. The curved shape of the knife allows him to make a clean cut that removes everything in one stroke, rather than requiring multiple cuts that would increase bleeding and trauma. Your father will hold your hand during the procedure, not because he's providing emotional support, but because he needs to make sure you don't die before the purification master finishes his work. If you die during castration, your father doesn't get refunded, and the purification master still expects to be paid for his time and effort. Death during the procedure is considered an occupational hazard, like a blacksmith occasionally getting burned or a farmer sometimes getting kicked by a horse. The pepper water wash before cutting serves multiple purposes. It numbs the area slightly, though not nearly enough to make the experience painless. It also cleans the skin, reducing the risk of infection, though infection will remain a major threat for weeks after the procedure. Most importantly, the pepper water causes the genitals to contract, making them easier to remove in a single cut. The purification master learned this technique from his father, who learned it from his father, creating a generational tradition of child genital removal. After your penis and testicles are removed, the purification master will pack the wound with herbs and cloth to control bleeding. The bamboo tube inserted into your urethra will allow you to urinate without reopening the wound, though urination will be extraordinarily painful for several weeks. You'll be given a mixture of herbs and rice wine to dull the pain, though the herbs are probably more effective than the wine. The pain medication available in early 15th century China is roughly equivalent to chewing on tree bark and hoping for the best. The healing process takes about 6 weeks, during which time you'll be confined to bed and monitored constantly for signs of infection. Infection is the leading cause of death among castrated boys, followed by bleeding and shock. Your body will go through hormonal changes as it adjusts to the absence of testosterone-producing organs. Your voice will remain high, your facial hair will never grow, and your body will develop the soft, rounded characteristics that make eunuchs easily identifiable. If you survive the castration and recovery period, you'll be taken to Beijing for evaluation by imperial officials. Not all castrated boys are selected for palace service. Some are rejected for being too weak, too ugly, or too stupid for imperial employment. Rejected eunuchs often become beggars or servants to wealthy families, having sacrificed their manhood for nothing. The lucky ones are chosen for the imperial palace, where they'll begin training for a life of service to the emperor. The training process for new eunuchs is brutal and comprehensive. You'll learn palace etiquette, proper forms of address, and the complex hierarchy that governs imperial service. You'll be taught to read and write, skills that were rare among common people, but essential for palace administration. You'll also learn to suppress any remaining traces of masculine behavior, since eunuchs are expected to be deferential, submissive, and completely focused on serving the emperor's needs. Palace life for eunuchs involves endless rules and regulations. You'll wake before dawn, dress in the prescribed uniform, and spend your days performing whatever tasks are assigned to you. These might include cleaning the emperor's chambers, serving food to imperial concubines, carrying messages between palace officials, or standing guard outside the imperial bedchamber. Every aspect of your life will be regulated, from what you eat to how you walk to whom you're allowed to speak with. The hierarchy among eunuchs is as complex and rigid as any other aspect of Chinese imperial administration. Senior eunuchs hold enormous power and influence, while junior eunuchs are treated little better than slaves. Advancement through the ranks requires a combination of competence, loyalty, and political skill. The most successful eunuchs become confidants and advisors to the emperor, wielding influence that extends far beyond the palace walls. But success in the eunuch system comes at an enormous cost. You'll never have a family, never experience sexual intimacy, and never have children to care for you in old age. Your entire identity will be defined by your service to the emperor and your lack of masculine characteristics. You'll live in a world of other castrated men and sexually frustrated women, all of you serving a man whose power depends partly on your collective sexual neutrality. The irony of the eunuch system is that it's designed to prevent sexual intrigue while creating the perfect conditions for sexual frustration and forbiddens relationships. Eunuchs and concubines, both sexually constrained and living in close proximity, often develop romantic and physical relationships despite the severe penalties for such behavior. The very system designed to prevent sexual complications actually creates more complex sexual dynamics than would exist in a normal household. Your castration next Tuesday is part of a system that will eventually employ over 70,000 eunuchs at the height of the Ming Dynasty. The Yongle Emperor alone will oversee the castration of tens of thousands of boys, all in service of creating a palace system that can manage his enormous harem and complex administrative needs. Your individual suffering is just one small part of a massive machine designed to concentrate power in the hands of one man. The purification master, who will perform your castration, views his work as both a sacred calling and a practical trade. He's not sadistic or cruel, just extremely skilled at removing children's genitals for money. He takes pride in his high survival rate and his ability to perform the procedure quickly and cleanly. He'll genuinely wish you well as he ties you to the chair and prepares to change your life forever with a few strokes of his heated blade. I'm sorry, but I can't help with that. The herbs that will be packed into your wound are a closely guarded family secret, passed down through generations of professional castrators. They include ground-up tree bark, dried flowers, and what the purification master mysteriously refers to as special earth, but what you suspect is probably just dirt mixed with crushed beetles. The entire herbal mixture has been blessed by a local monk, not because anyone believes divine intervention will help you survive having your genitals removed, but because it makes the parents feel slightly better about paying someone to mutilate their children. Your father spends his last few coins buying rice wine for your post-castration pain management. The wine is weak and tastes like someone fermented old socks, but it's the strongest painkiller available in your village. The purification master recommends giving you small sips throughout the day to keep you unconscious as much as possible during the healing process. Conscious children tend to scream more, which disturbs the neighbors and creates unnecessary drama during what should be a straightforward medical procedure. The special chair you'll be tied to was built by the purification master's grandfather, who apparently had strong opinions about the proper way to restrain children during genital removal. The chair is made from sturdy oak and has leather straps positioned at strategic points to immobilize your arms, legs, and torso. The hole in the seat is worn smooth from decades of use, and the wood around it is stained dark brown with what you really hope is just old blood rather than other bodily fluids that might emerge during the castration process. Your younger sister, who's only 5 years old, doesn't understand why everyone keeps talking about your purification with such serious expressions. She thinks you're going to take a really thorough bath and then go live in the emperor's palace, which sounds like fun to her. Your father has decided not to explain the actual procedure to her, partly to spare her feelings, and partly because he's not entirely sure how to explain castration to someone who doesn't even understand where babies come from. The village children who have older brothers serving as eunuchs in Beijing occasionally receive letters and small gifts, proving that some castrated boys do survive and prosper in imperial service. These success stories are told and retold throughout the village, creating a mythology around eunuch service that conveniently ignores the 10% mortality rate and focuses on the potential for advancement and wealth. It's like a medieval version of buying lottery tickets, except instead of losing money, you lose your reproductive organs. Your last few days, as an anatomically complete male, are spent helping your father with farm work and trying not to think about Tuesday. The work consists mainly of pulling weeds from fields that produce barely enough food to keep your family from starving, which gives you plenty of time to contemplate your upcoming surgical experience. Every time you urinate, you're reminded that this simple bodily function is about to become significantly more complicated and painful for the rest of your life. The purification master visits your house on Monday evening to perform a final examination and collect his payment. He pokes and prods your genitals with the detached professionalism of someone evaluating livestock, making notes about size, positioning, and overall health. He seems satisfied with what he finds, commenting to your father that you have good material to work with and should heal cleanly if everything goes according to plan. The casual way he discusses your penis, like it's a piece of meat he's about to butcher, is somehow more disturbing than outright cruelty would be. Monday night dinner is a somber affair, with your father drinking more rice wine than usual, and your sister chattering excitedly about your upcoming adventure in the imperial palace. Your father has prepared what he considers a feast in your honor, which means there's actually meat in the soup instead of just bones and vegetables. The meat is from a chicken that died of natural causes rather than being slaughtered, so it tastes like disappointment with a side of potential food poisoning, but it's the thought that counts. You don't sleep well Monday night, partly because of anxiety about the next day's procedure, and partly because your father's snoring sounds like a dying water buffalo. Every time you drift off, you dream about sharp knives and bamboo tubes and wake up in a cold sweat. By morning, you're exhausted and terrified, which the purification master says is actually ideal because tired children struggle less during the procedure and heal more quickly afterward. Tuesday morning arrives with all the enthusiasm of a funeral procession. Your father wakes you before dawn, feeds you a final meal of rice gruel, and then escorts you to the purification master's house, like you're walking to your own execution. The early morning air is cold and damp, and you can hear roosters crowing in the distance, completely unaware that they're providing background music for your transition from boy to eunuch. The purification master's workshop is a small building behind his house that smells like herbs, blood, and something that might be disinfectant, but is probably just strong wine. The walls are lined with various instruments that look more suited for carpentry than surgery, and there are mysterious stains on the wooden floor that you prefer not to examine too closely. The special chair sits in the center of the room, like a throne designed by someone with very specific and disturbing interests. The procedure begins with the purification master washing his hands and heating his knife over a small brazier. The blade glows red hot in the dim morning light, and you can smell the metal warming up. He tests the sharpness by shaving a few hairs off his arm, apparently satisfied with the results. The knife has been used for hundreds of castrations and has developed a slight curve from repeated sharpening, giving it the appearance of a miniature scythe designed for harvesting very specific crops. Your father helps the purification master tie you to the chair, apologizing quietly as they secure the leather straps around your wrists and ankles. The straps are tight enough to prevent movement, but not quite tight enough to cut off circulation, representing decades of experience in restraining panicked children. The purification master explains each step of the process as he works, not to educate you, but to keep himself focused and ensure he doesn't forget any crucial details. The pepper water wash is administered with a cloth that's been soaking in the solution for several hours. The liquid is cold and stings immediately, causing your genitals to contract and shrivel in a way that the purification master nods approvingly at. He comments to your father that the reaction is exactly what he wants to see, as it will make the cutting easier and reduce bleeding. The sensation is like being splashed with ice water mixed with ground-up chili peppers, and you begin to understand why most boys scream during this part of the procedure. The actual cutting happens faster than you expected and slower than you hoped. The purification master grabs your penis and testicles with one hand while wielding the heated knife with the other, positioning the blade for what he refers to as the decisive stroke. The pain is immediate, overwhelming, and unlike anything you've ever experienced. It's not just physical agony, but a fundamental violation of your body that your 8-year-old mind can't fully process. You scream, of course, but the sound seems to come from someone else. The bamboo tube insertion is almost anticlimactic after the cutting, though it adds a new dimension of discomfort to your already traumatized anatomy. The purification master lubricates the tube with animal fat before carefully inserting it into what remains of your urethra, commenting that proper placement is crucial for preventing complications during healing. The tube feels enormous and foreign, like having a tree branch jammed into your most sensitive areas, but it's necessary to prevent your urethra from sealing shut as the wound heals. The herbal packing that follows involves stuffing various plant materials into and around your wound to control bleeding and promote healing. The purification master works quickly and efficiently, his hands covered in your blood as he shapes the herbal mixture into a crude bandage that covers the entire area where your genitals used to be. The herbs smell like a combination of medicine and compost, and they sting almost as much as the pepper water did. Your father pays the purification master while you lie semi-conscious on the chair, too shocked and traumatized to fully comprehend what has just happened to you. The transaction is completed with a handshake and wishes for your successful recovery, as if they've just concluded a normal business deal rather than the surgical removal of a child's reproductive organs. The purification master wipes his bloody hands on a cloth and begins cleaning his instruments for the next customer, who is scheduled to arrive that afternoon. The journey home is a blur of pain, nausea, and the gradual realization that your life has been permanently altered in ways you can't yet understand. Your father carries you because walking is impossible, and every step he takes sends waves of agony through your mutilated body. The herbal packing shifts and chafes with each movement, and you can feel warm liquid seeping through the bandages that might be blood or might be the various fluids your body is producing in response to the trauma. Recovery begins immediately and will continue for the next 6 weeks, assuming you survive the various complications that kill roughly 10% of castrated boys. The first few days are the most dangerous, as your body struggles to cope with the surgical trauma, blood loss, and shock. You drift in and out of consciousness, sustained by small sips of rice wine and whatever thin soup your father can coax down your throat. The pain is constant and overwhelming, making sleep impossible except when you pass out from exhaustion. Infection is your primary enemy during the healing process, and there's not much you can do to prevent it except hope that the purification master's herbs and techniques were sufficient to keep harmful bacteria from taking hold in your wound. Every day that passes without fever or obvious signs of rot is considered a small victory. Your father checks the bandages regularly, looking for changes in color, smell, or texture that might indicate serious complications requiring immediate attention from the village doctor. The bamboo tube that allows you to urinate becomes both a blessing and a curse during recovery. Without it, your urethra would heal shut, making urination impossible and ensuring a slow, agonizing death. With it, every attempt to empty your bladder is excruciating, as urine passes through traumatized tissue and around the foreign object jammed into your most sensitive anatomy. The process takes several minutes and leaves you exhausted and whimpering, but it's necessary to prevent even worse complications. Your diet during recovery consists mainly of rice gruel, weak tea, and whatever vegetables your family can afford to spare from their meager stores. Solid food is discouraged because it requires too much energy to digest, and your body needs to focus all its resources on healing the surgical site. The bland diet does nothing to improve your mood or energy levels, but it's designed to keep you alive rather than happy or comfortable. The hormonal changes begin almost immediately after castration, as your body adjusts to the sudden absence of testosterone-producing organs. Your voice, which had been starting to crack occasionally, stabilizes at its current pitch and will remain high and childlike for the rest of your life. Your muscle development slows dramatically, and your body begins to accumulate fat in patterns more typical of women than men. These changes are gradual but permanent, marking you forever as someone who is castrated before reaching sexual maturity. Sleep becomes your primary activity during recovery, not because you're particularly tired, but because unconsciousness is the only escape from the constant pain and the growing awareness of what has been done to you. Your dreams are filled with confused images of knives, blood, and the strange sensation of missing parts of your body that should still be there. Waking up is always disappointing, as reality intrudes and reminds you that the nightmare is real and permanent. Your sister visits regularly, bringing you small gifts and chattering about village gossip while carefully avoiding looking at the bandaged area between your legs. She's been told that you're recovering from a necessary medical procedure, and she accepts this explanation with the trusting innocence of a 5-year-old. Her presence is both comforting and painful, as she represents the normal childhood you've been forced to abandon in exchange for a chance at imperial service. The village doctor makes occasional visits to check on your progress, though his medical knowledge is limited to basic wound care and herbal remedies that may or may not have any actual therapeutic value. He examines the surgical site, changes the bandages, and pronounces your recovery to be proceeding normally, which means you haven't died yet and don't appear to be developing any obvious infections. His reassurances are meant to comfort your father rather than you, as everyone understands that your survival is still far from guaranteed. Week 3 of recovery marks a crucial turning point, as most boys who are going to die from castration complications do so within the first 20 days. Your survival past this milestone means the immediate danger has passed, though you're still weeks away from complete healing and months away from regaining anything resembling normal functionality. The reduction in daily pain is noticeable, though urination remains agonizing and the psychological trauma of your experience is only beginning to fully register. The gradual removal of herbal packing from your wound reveals the extent of the surgical alteration for the first time since the procedure. Where your penis and testicles once were, there's now a small opening surrounded by scar tissue that bears little resemblance to normal male anatomy. The sight is shocking and alien, confirming in visual terms what you've been slowly accepting intellectually. You are no longer anatomically male, and you never will be again. Learning to walk again requires careful attention to balance and movement, as the absence of external genitalia changes your center of gravity slightly and affects how you position your legs while moving. The first few attempts are wobbly and uncertain, complicated by residual pain and the psychological difficulty of accepting your altered body. Each step is a reminder of what you've lost and what you've supposedly gained in exchange. The bamboo tube remains in place for nearly a month, during which time it becomes encrusted with various bodily secretions and develops an increasingly unpleasant odor that no amount of cleaning can completely eliminate. Its removal is almost as traumatic as its insertion, involving careful extraction of the tube while hoping that your urethra has healed properly around it. The procedure goes smoothly, leaving you with a functional, if permanently altered, urinary system. Your father begins making preparations for your eventual journey to Beijing, assuming you continue to recover without major complications. This involves selling some of the family's few remaining possessions to raise money for travel expenses and purchasing the basic supplies you'll need for the journey. The preparations are optimistic rather than certain, as there's still no guarantee that you'll be accepted for imperial service even if you survive the recovery process. Letters arrive occasionally from other families in the village whose sons have been successfully placed in imperial service, providing updates on their progress and sometimes including small amounts of money or gifts. These communications serve as both encouragement and reminder of what's at stake in your recovery. Success means a lifetime of comfortable servitude and the ability to support your family financially. Failure means you've sacrificed your manhood for nothing. The psychological adjustment to your new status as a eunuch proves more difficult than the physical healing. You're no longer quite a boy, since boys have penises, but you're not yet a man, since men have fully developed sexual characteristics. You exist in a liminal space between genders, marked by what you've lost rather than what you've gained. This ambiguous identity will define the rest of your life and affects how you relate to everyone around you. Week 6 of recovery arrives with the gradual realization that you've survived the immediate dangers of castration and are ready to begin the next phase of your transformation from village boy to imperial eunuch. Your physical wounds have healed sufficiently to allow normal movement, though urination will remain uncomfortable for several more months. More importantly, you've passed the critical survival threshold that qualifies you for consideration as an imperial servant. The purification master visits to examine his work and pronounce the castration successful. He seems pleased with the healing process and comments that you should have no trouble gaining acceptance for palace service, assuming you can demonstrate appropriate intelligence and demeanor during the selection process. His approval is both validating and disturbing, as it confirms that you've been successfully transformed into the kind of sexually neutralized human being that the imperial system requires. Your father receives a letter from an agent in Beijing who specializes in placing castrated boys in imperial service. The agent has heard about your successful recovery and is interested in evaluating you for potential placement in the Yongle Emperor's expanding palace system. This represents the first concrete step toward achieving the goal that justified your castration, though it also reminds you that your ordeal is far from over. The journey to Beijing will take several weeks and will expose you to dangers ranging from bandits to disease to simple exposure during bad weather. Your recent surgical experience has left you physically weakened and more vulnerable to illness than a normal 8-year-old boy would be. The trip represents a significant risk, but it's also your only chance to transform your sacrifice into something resembling success. Meanwhile, in the imperial capital, the Yongle Emperor continues his massive construction projects and military campaigns, all of which require extensive administrative support from trusted servants who can be relied upon to remain loyal regardless of political changes or personal ambitions. The emperor's preference for eunuchs in sensitive positions stems partly from their inability to found rival dynasties and partly from their complete dependence on imperial favor for survival and advancement. The Forbidden City nears completion as thousands of workers, many of them essentially slaves, labor to create the most magnificent palace complex in the world. The inner chambers where the emperor's wives and concubines will live are designed to be staffed entirely by eunuchs, ensuring that no intact males have access to the imperial women. This system requires a steady supply of castrated boys like you, making your individual suffering part of a much larger machine of imperial control and display. The emperor's harem is already being populated with women collected from across the Chinese Empire and its tributary states. Korean girls, selected for their beauty and refined manners, arrive regularly as diplomatic gifts from the Joseon Kingdom. Vietnamese women captured during military campaigns are evaluated for their potential as imperial concubines or servants. Mongol princesses taken as political hostages are integrated into the imperial household as symbols of Chinese dominance over nomadic peoples. Each group of women requires supervision by eunuchs who can be trusted to manage their daily lives without developing inappropriate relationships or threatening the emperor's exclusive sexual access to his concubines. The eunuchs serve as intermediaries between the emperor and his women, conveying his wishes and reporting on their behavior while remaining sexually incapable of competing for their affections or fathering children who might complicate the imperial succession. The selection process for new eunuchs involves careful evaluation of physical health, intellectual capacity, and psychological suitability for palace service. Boys who are too weak, too stupid, or too emotionally unstable are rejected and must find alternative employment despite their castration. The successful candidates undergo extensive training in palace etiquette, administrative procedures, and the complex hierarchy that governs imperial service. Your recovery has progressed sufficiently that you can now contemplate the possibility of actually reaching Beijing and competing for placement in the imperial palace system. The journey will test your physical endurance and expose you to the wider world beyond your impoverished village for the first time. Success will mean leaving behind everything familiar and entering a world of luxury, power, and constant danger where your survival depends entirely on your ability to serve the emperor's needs effectively. The decision to castrate you was made by adults who viewed your reproductive organs as obstacles to economic advancement rather than integral parts of your identity and future happiness. Their calculation proved correct in strictly financial terms, as eunuch service offers opportunities for wealth and status that would be impossible for a poor village boy to achieve through normal means. Whether the trade-off was worth it remains to be seen, but the transaction is irreversible regardless of how you eventually feel about it. The weeks pass slowly as your body adjusts to its new reality, and you begin to understand that castration was just the beginning of your transformation. The emperor's agents arrive in your village during the 5th week of your recovery, traveling in a small convoy that includes guards, administrative officials, and what appears to be a doctor whose job is to examine castrated boys and determine their fitness for imperial service. The arrival of these officials creates excitement throughout the village, as it represents the possibility that someone local might actually succeed in gaining placement at the imperial court. The examination process takes place in the village headman's house, which has been temporarily converted into a makeshift medical facility for the occasion. You're brought in along with 3 other boys who underwent castration around the same time, creating an awkward gathering of recently mutilated children trying to impress imperial bureaucrats with their potential for loyal service. The doctor examines each boy's surgical site to ensure proper healing, checks for signs of infection or complications, and evaluates overall health and physical development. Your examination goes well, with the doctor commenting approvingly on the quality of the purification, master's work, and your body's response to the procedure. He notes that your wound has healed cleanly. Your urethra appears to be functioning normally, and you show no signs of the infections that sometimes develop weeks or months after castration. The doctor also tests your mental capabilities by asking you to recite various poems and solve simple mathematical problems, establishing that you possess the intellectual capacity required for palace service. The other boys don't fare as well during their evaluations. One shows signs of a developing infection that could prove fatal if left untreated. Another appears to have suffered nerve damage during his castration that affects his ability to walk properly. The third boy passes the physical examination, but fails the intelligence tests, demonstrating reading and mathematical skills that fall below the minimum standards for imperial service. You begin to understand that surviving castration is only the first hurdle in a selection process designed to identify the most promising candidates. The imperial agent in charge of recruitment explains the next steps in the process while your father listens nervously and takes notes on a piece of bark, since paper is too expensive for your family to afford. You'll be taken to Beijing along with successful candidates from other villages in the region. A journey that will take approximately 3 weeks, depending on weather conditions and the availability of river transport. Once in the capital, you'll undergo additional evaluations and training before being assigned to specific positions within the imperial household. The agent also explains the financial arrangements that govern eunuch service, which are more complex than your father initially understood. While eunuchs do receive regular wages and have opportunities for advancement that can lead to substantial wealth, they're also required to send a portion of their earnings back to their families as a form of ongoing tribute to the emperor. This system ensures that eunuchs remain connected to their home villages, while also providing the imperial government with a network of financial obligations that can be used to control behavior and maintain loyalty. Preparations for departure begin immediately, as the imperial convoy plans to leave within a few days and won't wait for boys who aren't ready to travel. Your father sells the family's last pig to raise money for your travel supplies, which include a change of clothes, a small amount of food for the journey, and a wooden token that identifies you as an accepted candidate for imperial service. The token is carved with your name and village of origin, and losing it would make it impossible for you to prove your legitimate status as a potential eunuch. Your sister cries when she learns that you'll be leaving, finally understanding that your purification means permanent separation from your family rather than a temporary medical procedure. Your father explains to her that you'll be serving the emperor in his magnificent palace, learning to read and write, and eventually sending money back to help support the family. He doesn't mention that eunuchs typically never return to their home villages, or that your chances of seeing your sister again are essentially zero. The night before departure, your father gives you the only valuable object the family owns, a small jade pendant that belonged to your mother and was supposed to be saved for your wedding day. Since you'll never have a wedding day, he's decided you should carry it as a reminder of your family and your origins. The pendant is carved in the shape of a fish, which is supposed to bring good luck and prosperity to whoever wears it. You tie it around your neck with a piece of string and tuck it under your shirt, where it feels warm against your chest. The morning of departure arrives gray and cold, with a light rain that turns the village streets into muddy streams. The imperial convoy assembles near the village center, consisting of 2 covered wagons for transporting the selected boys, several horses for the officials and guards, and a supply cart loaded with food and equipment for the journey. The wagons are pulled by oxen rather than horses, which means the journey will be slow but steady regardless of road conditions. You climb into one of the covered wagons, along with 5 other castrated boys from nearby villages, creating an awkward social situation since none of you know each other, but you're all united by the shared experience of recent genital removal. The wagon is equipped with straw for bedding and a bucket for waste, since stopping for bathroom breaks would slow the convoy's progress. The canvas cover provides protection from rain, but traps the smell of unwashed bodies, creating an atmosphere that's both intimate and unpleasant. The first few days of travel are miserable, as your still healing surgical site is aggravated by the constant bouncing and jostling of the wagon over rough roads. The other boys are experiencing similar discomfort, leading to a group dynamic based on shared suffering rather than friendship. Conversation is minimal, partly because talking requires energy that's better saved for enduring the physical discomfort of travel, and partly because none of you are particularly eager to discuss the circumstances that led to your current situation. The imperial officials treat you and the other boys with professional indifference, providing adequate food and medical care while maintaining the emotional distance appropriate to their roles as government bureaucrats dealing with human cargo. They're not cruel, but they're also not interested in developing personal relationships with children, who represent nothing more than potential additions to the imperial workforce. Your value lies in your castrated status and your potential for loyal service, not in your individual personality or needs. Food during the journey consists mainly of rice, dried vegetables, and occasional scraps of meat that taste like they've been preserved with salt and optimism. The imperial officials eat better meals prepared by their own cooks, but they share their food when supplies run low or when one of the boys appears to be developing health problems that might threaten his survival. Keeping the castrated boys alive and healthy is an important part of their mission, since dead eunuchs represent wasted investment and potential criticism from their superiors. The landscape changes gradually as you travel north toward Beijing, becoming less mountainous and more agricultural as you approach the heartland of Chinese civilization. The villages you pass through are larger and more prosperous than your home, with better roads, more substantial buildings, and evidence of the trade networks that connect rural areas to major cities. You begin to understand that your own village exists on the periphery of Chinese society, barely connected to the centers of power and wealth that define the empire. Other travelers on the road include merchants, government officials, military units, and religious pilgrims, all moving through the transportation network that enables the Chinese empire to function as a unified political entity. The imperial convoy receives respectful treatment from other travelers, who recognize the official banners and give way to allow faster passage. Your presence in the convoy marks you as someone under imperial protection, providing a level of safety and status that you've never experienced before. River crossings require careful negotiation with ferrymen and boat operators, as the convoy's size and official status affect both the cost and complexity of transportation. The imperial officials are skilled at these negotiations, using a combination of official authority and practical diplomacy to secure passage for the entire group. You learn that imperial service involves constant navigation of bureaucratic and social relationships, requiring skills that extend far beyond simple obedience to orders. Week 2 of the journey brings you into regions where the effects of imperial power are more visible and immediate. The roads are better maintained, the villages show evidence of greater prosperity, and imperial officials appear more frequently. You also begin to encounter other groups of castrated boys being transported to Beijing from different regions, suggesting that your experience is part of a much larger system for recruiting and training eunuchs throughout the empire. The realization that hundreds of boys are undergoing the same journey simultaneously is both comforting and disturbing. On one hand, you're not alone in your experience of castration and recruitment for imperial service. On the other hand, the scale of the system suggests that individual eunuchs are easily replaceable if they fail to meet expectations or if political circumstances change. Your survival and success depend on your ability to distinguish yourself from the crowd while also conforming to the behavioral expectations that define successful eunuch service. As you approach Beijing, the signs of imperial power become increasingly obvious and impressive. The roads are paved with stone rather than packed earth. Bridges span rivers and valleys with engineering sophistication that surpasses anything you've seen before, and the volume of traffic increases dramatically as travelers from throughout the empire converge on the capital. You begin to understand why Beijing is considered the center of the civilized world, and why service in the imperial palace represents the pinnacle of achievement for someone of your background. The city walls of Beijing appear on the horizon like mountains made by human hands, stretching across the landscape with a scale and grandeur that defies comprehension. The walls are higher and thicker than any structure you've ever imagined, and they extend as far as you can see in both directions. Guard towers punctuate the wall at regular intervals, and massive gates control access to the city interior. You realize that everything you've experienced so far in your life has been preparation for entering this urban fortress, where the emperor exercises absolute power over the largest population in the world. The process of entering Beijing involves multiple checkpoints where imperial officials examine travel documents, inspect cargo, and verify the legitimacy of everyone seeking access to the capital. The convoy's official status provides expedited passage through these checkpoints, but you still witness the elaborate security procedures that protect the imperial seat from unauthorized visitors. The level of organization and control impresses you while also making it clear that individual freedom is not a priority in imperial administration. Inside the city walls, Beijing reveals itself as a vast urban landscape, unlike anything that exists in rural China. Streets are laid out in geometric patterns that reflect careful planning rather than organic growth. Buildings are constructed from stone and brick rather than wood and mud, and many structures rise multiple stories above street level. The population density is overwhelming, with thousands of people visible at any given moment engaged in commerce, transportation, administration, and the countless other activities that keep a major city functioning. The smells of the city assault your rural sensibilities with their intensity and variety. Cooking food, human waste, animal droppings, incense, metalworking, leather tanning, and dozens of other urban odors combine to create an olfactory environment that's both exciting and nauseating. You begin to understand why city people have different mannerisms and expressions than rural villagers, as urban life requires constant adaptation to sensory overload and social density that would be unbearable in smaller communities. Your convoy makes its way through the city streets toward the imperial palace complex, navigating traffic that includes pedestrians, horsemen, ox carts, sedan chairs, and various types of wheeled vehicles you've never seen before. The diversity of people is remarkable, with individuals from different regions of China and foreign countries all participating in the economic and political activities that center on imperial power. You realize that Beijing is not just a Chinese city, but an international hub where the emperor's influence extends throughout the known world. The Forbidden City emerges from the urban landscape like a separate world enclosed within the larger city, surrounded by its own walls and gates that dwarf even the impressive fortifications that protect Beijing itself. The palace complex appears to stretch for miles in every direction, containing hundreds of buildings arranged in patterns that suggest both practical functionality and symbolic meaning. You understand that the physical grandeur of the imperial palace is designed to overwhelm visitors and reinforce the emperor's claim to divine authority over human affairs. The convoy stops at a gate that provides access to the outer sections of the palace complex, where new eunuchs undergo processing and initial training before being assigned to specific duties within the imperial household. The gate is guarded by soldiers whose weapons, armor, and disciplined bearing make it clear that imperial security is a serious matter that doesn't tolerate unauthorized access or inappropriate behavior. You realize that entering the Forbidden City means leaving behind any possibility of returning to your previous life or maintaining independence from imperial authority. The processing facility for new eunuchs is a complex of buildings designed specifically to handle the evaluation, training, and assignment of castrated boys recruited from throughout the empire. The facilities include dormitories for housing candidates during their evaluation period, classrooms for instruction in palace etiquette and administrative procedures, medical facilities for treating health problems that develop during travel or training, and administrative offices where decisions are made about individual assignments and career paths. You're assigned to a dormitory that houses 20 other boys who arrived in Beijing around the same time from different regions of the empire. The diversity of regional backgrounds creates interesting social dynamics, as boys from different provinces speak with different accents, follow different customs, and bring different expectations about imperial service. The dormitory becomes a microcosm of the empire itself, where local differences must be subordinated to the common goal of successful service to the emperor. The daily routine in the processing facility is structured around meals, classes, medical examinations, and supervised recreation periods that allow new eunuchs to adjust gradually to palace life while being evaluated for their suitability for different types of assignments. The routine is designed to identify boys who possess the intelligence, temperament, and physical capabilities required for various positions within the imperial household, ranging from simple domestic service to complex administrative responsibilities. Your first formal meal in the processing facility reveals the dramatic improvement in diet that accompanies imperial service, even at the lowest levels. The food is not only more abundant than what you ate in your village, but also more varied and better prepared. Rice is accompanied by multiple types of vegetables, small portions of meat or fish, and seasonings that enhance flavor rather than merely preserving food from spoilage. You begin to understand why imperial service is considered a path to prosperity despite the obvious costs involved. Classes in palace etiquette focus on the complex system of behavioral rules that govern interactions between different levels of the imperial hierarchy. You learn how to bow properly to officials of various ranks, how to speak in the formal language required for addressing superiors, and how to move through palace spaces without violating protocols that could result in punishment or dismissal. The etiquette training reveals that imperial service requires constant attention to social signals and behavioral expectations that are far more complex than anything that exists in village life. Administrative training covers basic literacy and numeracy, skills that are essential for record keeping and communication within the imperial bureaucracy. You learn to read and write Chinese characters, perform mathematical calculations, and understand the organizational structure that governs palace operations. The intellectual demands of this training are greater than anything you experienced in your village, where literacy was rare and mathematical skills were limited to basic counting and measurement. Medical examinations during the processing period focus on identifying health problems that might affect your ability to perform assigned duties, or that might pose risks to other members of the palace community. The palace doctors are more skilled than any medical practitioners you encountered in rural areas, and they have access to medicines and treatments that are unavailable outside the imperial system. The medical care you receive represents another significant improvement in your life circumstances, though it comes at the cost of complete dependence on imperial authority. Recreation periods provide opportunities for informal social interaction with other new eunuchs, while also serving as occasions for continued evaluation by palace officials who observe your behavior and relationships. The officials are particularly interested in identifying boys who demonstrate leadership potential, unusual intelligence, or behavioral problems that might make them unsuitable for sensitive assignments. You learn to be cautious about expressing opinions or forming friendships that might be interpreted negatively by evaluators. The evaluation process culminates in individual interviews with senior palace officials who make decisions about specific assignments within the imperial household. These interviews test your knowledge of palace etiquette and administrative procedures, while also assessing your personality, ambitions, and potential for advancement within the eunuch hierarchy. The interview represents your opportunity to influence your own fate within the imperial system, though the range of available options is limited by your age, background, and the current needs of the palace administration. Your interview takes place in an office decorated with symbols of imperial power and furnished with objects that demonstrate the wealth and sophistication of the palace environment. The senior official conducting the interview is himself a eunuch who rose through the ranks to achieve a position of considerable authority and influence. His presence provides a model of what successful eunuch service can achieve, while also making it clear that advancement requires exceptional ability, absolute loyalty, and considerable good fortune. The questions you're asked during the interview cover your family background, your understanding of imperial authority, your willingness to dedicate your life to palace service, and your specific interests and capabilities that might be relevant to particular assignments. You answer carefully, trying to demonstrate intelligence and ambition while also showing appropriate deference to imperial authority and acceptance of your position within the palace hierarchy. The interview feels like an examination that will determine the entire course of your future life. The results of your evaluation are announced several days later during a formal ceremony that assigns each new eunuch to a specific position within the imperial household. The ceremony takes place in a hall decorated with imperial symbols and attended by senior officials who represent different departments of palace administration. The formal nature of the ceremony emphasizes that eunuch assignments are serious matters that carry significant responsibilities and expectations for performance. You're assigned to the inner palace division that manages the emperor's personal living quarters and provides direct service to the imperial family. This assignment is considered prestigious because it offers opportunities for advancement and places you in close proximity to the centers of imperial power. However, it also involves greater risks, as mistakes or inappropriate behavior in the emperor's presence can result in severe punishment or execution. Your assignment reflects the evaluation committee's assessment that you possess the intelligence and temperament required for sensitive duties. The inner palace assignment requires additional training in the specific protocols that govern service to the emperor and his family. You learn the proper procedures for entering and leaving the imperial presence, the appropriate ways to handle the emperor's personal belongings, and the security measures that protect the imperial family from potential threats. This specialized training takes several weeks and involves constant practice under the supervision of senior eunuchs who have years of experience in imperial service. Your living quarters in the inner palace are significantly better than the dormitory facilities used for processing new eunuchs, though they remain modest compared to the luxurious accommodations provided for the imperial family and high-ranking officials. You share a room with 3 other junior eunuchs, and you have access to better food, clothing, and medical care than you've ever experienced. The improved living conditions reinforce your understanding that imperial service offers material benefits that justify the personal costs involved in becoming a eunuch. The daily routine of inner palace service begins before dawn with personal preparation and attendance at morning briefings, where assignments are distributed and special instructions are provided for the day's activities. Your initial duties involve basic domestic tasks such as cleaning the emperor's chambers, maintaining his clothing and personal items, and assisting with meals and other daily activities. The work is not particularly demanding physically, but it requires constant attention to detail and perfect adherence to established procedures. Your first glimpse of the Yongle Emperor comes during a formal ceremony where new inner palace eunuchs are presented to receive imperial recognition of their appointments. The emperor appears as a figure of overwhelming authority and grandeur, dressed in robes that demonstrate his divine status and surrounded by symbols of imperial power that reinforce his position as the Son of Heaven. His presence is both magnificent and terrifying, making it clear that your life now depends entirely on his favor and approval. The emperor's personal quarters reveal a level of luxury and sophistication that exceeds anything you could have imagined during your village childhood. Every object in the imperial chambers is crafted from precious materials and decorated with artistic skill that represents the highest achievements of Chinese civilization. Silk tapestries, jade ornaments, gold fixtures, and countless other treasures create an environment that demonstrates the emperor's power to command the finest products of human creativity and craftsmanship. Your duties bring you into contact with other members of the imperial household, including the emperor's wives, concubines, and children, who represent different aspects of imperial power and influence. The empress and other high-ranking consorts command respect and deference from all palace personnel, including senior eunuchs, while lower-ranking concubines occupy positions that are prestigious, but also vulnerable to political changes and shifts in imperial favor. The children of the imperial family are treated as sacred beings whose safety and welfare are matters of supreme importance to palace administration. The emperor's daily routine involves a complex schedule of administrative meetings, ceremonial obligations, personal activities, and private time that must be coordinated by palace staff to ensure smooth operation of imperial government. As a junior eunuch, your role in this schedule is limited to specific tasks that contribute to the emperor's comfort and convenience without requiring direct interaction or independent decision-making. However, your presence in the imperial chambers provides opportunities to observe the exercise of absolute power and to learn about the political forces that shape imperial policy. The harem system that governs the emperor's relationships with his wives and concubines creates a complex social environment where eunuchs play essential roles as intermediaries, supervisors, and administrators. The women of the imperial household are organized in a hierarchy based on their status, favor with the emperor, and ability to produce male heirs who might succeed to the throne. This hierarchy creates competitive relationships among the women that require careful management to prevent conflicts that might disrupt palace operations or threaten imperial security. Your training in harem management covers the protocols that govern interactions between eunuchs and imperial women, the security measures that protect the women from unauthorized contact with intact males, and the administrative procedures that track the emperor's visits to different consorts and the resulting pregnancies and births. The complexity of harem administration requires sophisticated record-keeping and coordination among multiple departments of palace personnel, making it clear that managing the emperor's personal life is a significant administrative challenge. The international character of the emperor's harem reflects the extent of Chinese influence throughout East and Southeast Asia, as tributary relationships with neighboring kingdoms result in regular gifts of women who are selected for their beauty, intelligence, and potential to enhance diplomatic ties between China and other powers. Korean women are particularly prized for their refined manners and cultural accomplishments, while women from other regions bring different qualities that contribute to the diversity of the imperial household. The presence of foreign women in the harem creates additional complexities for palace administration, as these women often maintain connections to their home countries and may serve as informal diplomatic channels between the emperor and foreign rulers. Managing these relationships requires eunuchs who possess cultural sensitivity and language skills that enable effective communication across cultural boundaries. Your own background and capabilities will determine whether you have opportunities to work with foreign consorts or remain limited to domestic administrative duties. The emperor's sexual relationships with his wives and concubines are managed through elaborate protocols designed to ensure imperial satisfaction while maintaining the dignity and security of the imperial household. Eunuchs play crucial roles in these protocols, from preparing women for imperial visits to maintaining records of sexual encounters that might result in pregnancies. The intimate nature of these duties requires eunuchs who can be trusted with the most sensitive aspects of imperial private life while maintaining absolute discretion about what they observe. Your education in palace protocols includes instruction in the warning signs that indicate potential problems within the harem, such as unauthorized relationships between women and palace personnel, political conspiracies that might threaten imperial security, or health issues that require medical intervention. The ability to identify and report these problems is considered an essential skill for eunuchs who work in sensitive positions within the inner palace, as failure to detect threats or inappropriate behavior can result in severe punishment for supervisory personnel. The punishments for violations of harem protocols are designed to deter unauthorized behavior through the threat of consequences that range from demotion and transfer to torture and execution. You learn about specific cases where eunuchs, consorts, or other palace personnel faced punishment for various offenses, creating a culture of caution and compliance that prioritizes imperial security over individual comfort or happiness. The severity of potential punishments makes it clear that palace service requires constant vigilance and perfect adherence to established rules. The emperor's children represent both the future of the dynasty and potential sources of political instability, as succession disputes and power struggles among imperial offspring can threaten the stability of the entire governmental system. Eunuchs who work with imperial children must balance their duties to provide appropriate care and education, while also maintaining loyalty to the reigning emperor and avoiding involvement in political conspiracies that might develop around potential heirs to the throne. Your assignment to inner palace service places you within the most sensitive and dangerous environment in the Chinese Empire, where your survival depends on your ability to navigate complex political relationships while performing your duties with perfect competence and absolute loyalty. The opportunities for advancement are significant, but so are the risks of making mistakes that could result in punishment or death. Your success will depend on your ability to learn quickly, adapt to changing circumstances, and maintain the psychological resilience necessary to function effectively in an environment of constant pressure and scrutiny. The transformation from village boy to imperial eunuch is nearly complete as you adjust to your new life and responsibilities within the Forbidden City. Your castration, which seemed like the end of your childhood, now appears to have been merely the first step in a much larger process of becoming a different type of person entirely. You are no longer connected to your family or village, except through memories and the jade pendant you carry as a reminder of your origins. Your identity is now defined by your service to the emperor and your position within the palace hierarchy that governs every aspect of your existence. Hey guys, tonight you're being dragged from your cell to watch 2,800 women get sliced to death. The emperor is having a bad day about his shrinking penis. We'll get to why your survival depends on not laughing at imperial impotence. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is 1421, and you've been working as a junior eunuch in the Forbidden City for about 6 months now. Your daily routine involves cleaning the emperor's chamber pots, which smell like fermented fish sauce mixed with rotting cabbage, and trying not to make eye contact with anyone important enough to have you executed on a whim. Your castration wound has finally stopped aching constantly, though it still throbs when it rains, which is often. The bamboo tube they jammed into your urethra was removed 2 months ago, leaving you with a permanent burning sensation whenever you urinate. But hey, at least you're alive and earning regular meals that don't consist entirely of tree bark soup. Your sleeping quarters in the inner palace are shared with 3 other junior eunuchs, who snore like dying water buffaloes and smell like they've been marinating in their own sweat for weeks. The room is about the size of a large closet, with straw mats on a wooden floor that's perpetually damp from some mysterious leak in the ceiling. Your bedding consists of a thin blanket that was probably white originally, but has turned the color of old dishwater. The only window is a small opening covered with oiled paper that lets in just enough light to remind you that there's a world outside where people still have their genitals attached. You've learned to navigate the complex hierarchy of palace life, which is like playing a board game where all the rules change randomly and losing means death. Senior eunuchs treat you like a particularly stupid dog that might bite if not handled carefully. The emperor's concubines regard you as a piece of furniture that occasionally moves and requires feeding. Imperial guards view you as a potential security threat who needs constant supervision. And the emperor himself, well, you've only seen him from a distance, but his reputation for sudden violent mood swings keeps everyone in a state of permanent anxiety. Your typical day begins at 4 in the morning when a senior eunuch kicks you awake and assigns your daily tasks. These usually involve cleaning, carrying, fetching, or standing in specific locations for hours without moving or speaking. The work isn't physically demanding compared to farm labor, but it requires constant mental alertness, because making a mistake in the emperor's presence can result in immediate execution. You've already witnessed 3 eunuchs get dragged away for infractions like dropping a teacup, walking too loudly, or failing to bow at the precise angle required by protocol. The food in the inner palace is dramatically better than anything you ate in your village, but it comes with its own set of anxieties. Every meal might be your last if someone decides you've committed an offense worthy of death. The rice is actual white rice instead of the brown mush you grew up eating, and it's accompanied by vegetables that haven't been stored in dirt pits for months. Occasionally, there's even meat that comes from animals that died intentionally rather than from disease or old age. But you eat quickly and quietly, knowing that drawing attention to yourself during meals is another potential death sentence. The palace itself is a maze of courtyards, corridors, and chambers that seem designed to confuse and intimidate anyone who doesn't belong there. The buildings are constructed from materials you'd never seen before arriving in Beijing: polished stone, glazed tiles, and wood so fine it looks like it was carved by artists rather than carpenters. Everything is decorated with symbols of imperial power that remind you constantly of your insignificance and expendability. Dragons, phoenixes, and other mythical creatures stare down at you from every surface, their painted eyes seeming to track your movements and judge your worthiness. The emperor's personal chambers, where you spend most of your working hours, are filled with objects that cost more than your entire village's annual production. Silk tapestries depicting battles and ceremonies cover the walls, their colors so vibrant they seem to glow in the candlelight. Jade sculptures sit on tables made from wood that's been polished to mirror smoothness. Gold ornaments catch and reflect light in ways that hurt your eyes if you look directly at them. The emperor's bed is larger than the room you share with 3 other eunuchs, and it's covered with furs from animals you can't identify. Your direct supervisor is a middle-aged eunuch named Wang, who was castrated as a child during the previous emperor's reign and has survived decades of palace intrigue through a combination of competence and paranoia. Wang treats you with the weary patience of someone who's watched hundreds of junior eunuchs either advance through the ranks or disappear into unmarked graves. He teaches you the unwritten rules that determine survival in palace service. Never volunteer information, always confirm orders before acting, and maintain complete emotional neutrality regardless of what you witness. The emperor's concubines represent a fascinating and terrifying aspect of palace life that you're still learning to navigate. These women range in age from teenagers to women in their 30s, and they come from all corners of the Chinese Empire and its tributary states. Korean women are particularly numerous and highly regarded for their refined manners and cultural accomplishments. Vietnamese women bring a different kind of beauty and intelligence that the emperor apparently finds appealing. Mongol women add an exotic element that demonstrates Chinese dominance over nomadic peoples. Chinese women from various provinces represent different regional traditions and family connections that serve political purposes. The competition among these women for the emperor's attention creates an atmosphere of constant tension and intrigue that makes palace life unpredictable and dangerous. Alliances form and dissolve based on perceived changes in imperial favor. Rumors spread through the women's quarters like diseases, affecting everyone's behavior and creating opportunities for manipulation and betrayal. Your role as a eunuch places you in the middle of these dynamics, as you're expected to serve the women while also reporting any suspicious behavior to palace security officials. The emperor's sexual schedule is managed through elaborate protocols that treat imperial intercourse-like state ceremonies requiring careful preparation and documentation. You learn that specific eunuchs are responsible for preparing chosen concubines for imperial visits, which involves bathing, dressing, and psychological preparation designed to maximize the emperor's satisfaction. Other eunuchs maintain detailed records of these encounters, tracking which women are visited when, and monitoring for pregnancies that might produce imperial heirs. The intimate nature of these duties requires absolute discretion and creates additional opportunities for political manipulation. Your education in palace protocols includes learning to recognize the warning signs that indicate potential problems within the harem. Unauthorized relationships between women and palace personnel are a constant concern, as they violate the fundamental principle that only the emperor has sexual access to imperial women. Political conspiracies that might threaten imperial security are another major worry, as discontented concubines might ally with external enemies or rival claimants to the throne. Health issues requiring medical intervention must be identified and reported quickly to prevent the spread of diseases that could affect the emperor's welfare. The punishments for violations of palace protocols are designed to maintain order through terror rather than rehabilitation. You've heard stories about eunuchs who were executed for minor infractions, their bodies displayed as warnings to other palace personnel. Concubines who violated behavioral expectations faced punishments ranging from demotion and isolation to torture and death. Even imperial children could face severe consequences if their behavior was deemed inappropriate or threatening to palace security. The arbitrary nature of these punishments creates an atmosphere where everyone lives in constant fear of making mistakes that could prove fatal. The international character of the emperor's harem reflects the extent of Chinese influence throughout East and Southeast Asia during the early Ming Dynasty. Tributary relationships with neighboring kingdoms result in regular gifts of women who are selected for their beauty, intelligence, and potential to enhance diplomatic ties between China and other powers. These women often maintain connections to their home countries and may serve as informal diplomatic channels between the emperor and foreign rulers. Managing these relationships requires eunuchs who possess cultural sensitivity and language skills that enable effective communication across cultural boundaries. Your own linguistic abilities are limited to your native Chinese dialect and a few words of Mongolian you picked up from other eunuchs, which restricts your potential assignments within the palace hierarchy. Eunuchs who speak Korean, Vietnamese, or other foreign languages have opportunities for advancement that aren't available to monolingual servants. You begin to understand that language skills represent a form of human capital that can determine career prospects within the imperial system, creating incentives for self-improvement that go beyond simple survival. The daily routine of managing the emperor's harem involves countless small details that require constant attention and coordination among multiple departments of palace personnel. Meals must be prepared according to individual preferences and dietary restrictions. Clothing must be maintained and replaced according to seasonal changes and imperial whims. Entertainment must be provided through music, dance, and other cultural activities that keep the women occupied and prevent boredom from leading to disruptive behavior. Medical care must be available for health problems, ranging from minor illnesses to pregnancy complications. Your specific duties within this system involve mainly cleaning and maintenance tasks that keep the women's living quarters functional and presentable. You sweep floors, empty chamber pots, change bedding, and perform other domestic chores that are essential but invisible to anyone who matters politically. The work is tedious and repetitive, but it provides opportunities to observe the complex social dynamics that govern relationships among the emperor's women. You learn to recognize the subtle signs that indicate shifting alliances, growing tensions, and potential conflicts that might require intervention by palace security. The emperor's personal hygiene and grooming requirements create additional layers of complexity in palace administration. His daily bathing rituals involve multiple eunuchs who heat water, prepare scented oils, and assist with washing and drying procedures that must be performed according to precise protocols. His clothing changes require coordination among textile specialists, who maintain his extensive wardrobe and ensure that appropriate garments are available for different types of activities. His meals involve teams of cooks, tasters, and servers who work together to provide food that meets his nutritional requirements, while also protecting him from potential poisoning. Your involvement in these intimate aspects of imperial daily life gives you insights into the emperor's personality and behavior that are unavailable to most palace personnel. You observe his mood changes, his preferences for different types of food and entertainment, and his reactions to various political and personal pressures. This knowledge is both valuable and dangerous, as it could be used to predict imperial behavior or manipulated for political purposes. You learn to keep your observations to yourself while remaining alert to changes that might affect your own survival prospects. The emperor's relationship with his mother, the Empress Dowager, adds another dimension to palace politics that affects everyone who works in the inner palace. The Empress Dowager maintains her own household staff and exercises considerable influence over imperial policy through her access to the emperor and her connections to powerful officials throughout the government. Her preferences and opinions can determine the careers of individual eunuchs, making it essential to understand her expectations and avoid behavior that might offend her sensibilities. The emperor's children represent both the future of the dynasty and potential sources of political instability, as succession disputes and power struggles among imperial offspring can threaten the stability of the entire governmental system. You observe the careful balance that palace personnel must maintain between providing appropriate care and education for imperial children, while also avoiding involvement in political conspiracies that might develop around potential heirs to the throne. The children's tutors, servants, and guards all face unique pressures and risks associated with their proximity to future rulers. The seasonal cycles of palace life create regular changes in routine and atmosphere that affect everyone from the emperor to the lowest-ranking servants. Summer heat requires adjustments in clothing, food preparation, and daily schedules that accommodate higher temperatures and increased humidity. Winter cold demands different clothing, heating arrangements, and food storage methods that ensure comfort and health during harsh weather. Spring and autumn bring their own requirements related to ceremonial obligations, agricultural activities, and preparation for seasonal changes. Your first winter in the Forbidden City reveals the elaborate systems that maintain comfort and functionality in the palace, complex despite Beijing's harsh climate. Heating systems involve networks of underground flues that distribute warmth from central furnaces throughout the buildings. Food storage requires sophisticated preservation techniques that keep supplies fresh during months when fresh ingredients are unavailable. Clothing storage and maintenance become critical issues when heavy winter garments must be cleaned, repaired, and properly stored for use the following year. The emperor's ceremonial obligations create regular disruptions in palace, routine that require careful coordination among all departments of palace administration. State visits from foreign dignitaries involve elaborate preparations that affect everyone from senior officials to junior servants. Religious ceremonies require specific arrangements for ritual objects, ceremonial clothing, and participant coordination that tests the organizational capabilities of palace staff. Military reviews and other displays of imperial power involve logistical challenges that extend throughout the palace complex and beyond. Your role in these ceremonial events is limited to basic support tasks that keep the palace functioning smoothly while more senior personnel handle the visible aspects of imperial pageantry. You might be assigned to clean and prepare ceremonial spaces, assist with costume changes for participants, or maintain equipment and supplies needed for specific events. The work is often physically demanding and requires long hours, but it provides opportunities to observe the elaborate rituals that reinforce imperial authority and demonstrate Chinese power to domestic and foreign audiences. The palace's communication systems involve networks of messengers, written reports, and signal systems that enable coordination among the various departments and locations within the Forbidden City. You learn to recognize the different types of messages that circulate through the palace, from routine administrative communications to urgent security alerts that require immediate response. The hierarchy of information access means that junior eunuchs like yourself are generally excluded from sensitive communications. But you observe the effects of important decisions and policy changes on daily palace operations. The emperor's library and archive systems represent another aspect of palace life that demonstrates the scope and sophistication of imperial administration. Thousands of books, documents, and records are maintained by specialized personnel who ensure that information is properly cataloged, preserved, and made available when needed. The literary and historical knowledge contained in these collections influences imperial policy and provides cultural legitimacy for imperial authority. Your own limited literacy restricts your access to these resources, but you observe the scholars and officials who use them regularly. The palace workshops and manufacturing facilities produce many of the goods needed for imperial household operations, from furniture and clothing to ceremonial objects and weapons. Skilled craftsmen work under imperial patronage to create items that meet the high-quality standards required for palace use. These workshops also serve as training centers where traditional techniques are preserved and transmitted to new generations of artisans. The products of these workshops represent some of the finest examples of Chinese craftsmanship and artistic achievement. Your interactions with craftsmen and workshop personnel provide insights into the economic systems that support palace operations and connect the Forbidden City to the broader Chinese economy. Raw materials arrive from throughout the empire. Processed goods are distributed to various palace departments, and finished products are sometimes sent as diplomatic gifts to foreign courts. The scale and complexity of these economic relationships demonstrate the emperor's power to mobilize resources from across his domain for imperial purposes. The palace gardens and landscape features create carefully designed environments that provide beauty, recreation, and symbolic meaning for imperial household members. Artificial lakes, constructed hills, and planted areas require constant maintenance by specialized personnel who understand both horticultural techniques and aesthetic principles. The gardens serve as venues for imperial leisure activities and provide settings for informal political discussions that supplement the formal meetings conducted in palace halls. Your occasional assignments in the palace gardens provide relief from the claustrophobic atmosphere of indoor palace life and opportunities to observe the natural cycles that continue regardless of political developments. The seasonal changes in plant life, the behavior of birds and other animals, that live in the garden ecosystems, and the effects of weather on the constructed landscape all provide reminders of the natural world that exists beyond the artificial environment of the palace complex. The security systems that protect the emperor and the palace complex involve multiple layers of personnel, procedures, and physical barriers designed to prevent unauthorized access and detect potential threats. Guards patrol specific routes according to established schedules. Checkpoints control movement between different areas of the palace, and surveillance systems enable monitoring of activities throughout the complex. Your own movements are restricted to specific areas and require authorization for any deviation from normal routines. The investigation procedures used to address security concerns or policy violations involve interrogation techniques and evidence-gathering methods that can affect anyone who works in the palace. You learn to be extremely careful about your associations, conversations, and activities to avoid becoming involved in investigations that could result in punishment or execution. The atmosphere of constant surveillance and potential investigation creates a culture of caution and conformity that prioritizes survival over individual expression or initiative. But on this particular morning in early 1421, something feels different in the palace atmosphere. The usual routine of morning assignments is disrupted by urgent conferences among senior eunuchs and unusual activity in the security departments. Rumors circulate through the servant quarters about problems in the emperor's harem, though the specific nature of these problems remains unclear to junior personnel like yourself. The tension is palpable, creating an undercurrent of anxiety that affects everyone's behavior and makes normal tasks feel somehow ominous. Wang, your supervisor, appears more nervous than usual as he assigns your daily duties. His hands shake slightly as he reviews the task list, and he keeps glancing toward the corridors that lead to the emperor's private chambers. When you ask about the unusual activity, he gives you a sharp look and tells you to focus on your own responsibilities without asking unnecessary questions. The warning in his voice makes it clear that curiosity about palace politics could be dangerous, especially when tensions are running high. Your morning cleaning duties take you through several of the harem quarters, where you notice that many of the concubines appear agitated and fearful. Conversations stop abruptly when you enter rooms, and several women look at you with expressions that seem to combine suspicion with desperation. The normal routine of grooming, dressing, and social interaction among the women has been replaced by an atmosphere of whispered consultations and nervous glances. Something significant has clearly happened, though the details remain mysterious to someone of your low status. The emperor's Korean concubines seem particularly affected by whatever crisis has developed. Lady Han, who is normally composed and dignified in her interactions with palace personnel, appears pale and shaken as she sits quietly in her chambers. Other Korean women cluster together in small groups, speaking in their native language with voices too low for you to understand, even if you spoke Korean. The isolation of foreign women in the Chinese imperial system becomes apparent during times of crisis, when their lack of local connections and cultural understanding makes them especially vulnerable. The palace's usual sounds are replaced by an ominous quiet that makes every footstep seem unnaturally loud. The normal chatter of servants going about their duties has been replaced by hurried whispers and the quiet sound of rapid footsteps in distant corridors. Even the birds in the palace gardens seem to sense the tension, as their usual morning songs are replaced by agitated calls and nervous flight patterns. The atmosphere feels like the moments before a severe thunderstorm, when the air becomes heavy and charged with potential energy. Your duties bring you to the emperor's personal chambers, where you notice that additional guards have been posted at entrances and that senior officials are moving through the area with unusual frequency and urgency. The emperor himself is not visible, but the increased security presence suggests that his safety and security are matters of immediate concern. The guards watch everyone with heightened suspicion, and their hands rest on their weapons in a way that suggests they expect trouble. Around midday, the source of the crisis begins to become clear as official announcements are made throughout the palace complex. A serious conspiracy has been discovered within the imperial harem, involving allegations of adultery, poisoning, and plots against the emperor's life. The investigation is being conducted by the highest levels of palace security, and all personnel are ordered to report any suspicious activities or conversations they may have observed. The severity of the charges and the scope of the investigation make it clear that this is not a routine disciplinary matter, but a crisis that threatens the stability of the imperial household. The specific details of the conspiracy emerge gradually through fragments of information that filter down through the palace hierarchy. Apparently, one of the emperor's favorite concubines has been accused of poisoning another concubine, who died recently under mysterious circumstances. The investigation has revealed evidence of sexual relationships between harem women and palace eunuchs, violating the fundamental principles that govern palace security. Most seriously, interrogations have produced confessions suggesting a plot to assassinate the emperor himself, though the credibility and voluntariness of these confessions remain unclear. The emperor's response to these revelations is swift and brutal. Orders are issued for the immediate arrest of all individuals suspected of involvement in the conspiracy, including not only the primary suspects, but also their associates, servants, and anyone who might have knowledge of the alleged plot. The scope of the investigation expands rapidly as interrogations under torture produce additional names and accusations, creating a spiral of suspicion that threatens to engulf large portions of the palace community. You watch with growing horror as eunuchs you know personally are dragged away by security personnel, their protests and pleas for mercy ignored by guards who are following orders from the highest levels of imperial authority. Some of these men are junior eunuchs like yourself, who seem unlikely to be involved in major conspiracies, but their proximity to the accused women, or their presence in sensitive areas of the palace, has made them suspects. The arbitrary nature of the arrests makes it clear that survival now depends more on luck than innocence. The emperor's rage over the alleged betrayals is legendary, even by the standards of imperial violence, and reports of his reactions to the investigation's findings circulate through the palace like wildfire. According to these reports, the emperor has declared that the entire harem system has been corrupted by treachery and sexual impropriety that threatens not only his personal safety, but the sacred nature of imperial authority itself. His solution to this perceived corruption is characteristically extreme and comprehensive: the execution of everyone who might be involved in or have knowledge of the conspiracy. The logistics of conducting mass executions within the palace complex require careful planning and coordination among multiple departments of imperial administration. Execution sites must be prepared, executioners must be assembled and organized, and procedures must be established for handling the bodies of the victims. The scale of the planned executions is unprecedented even in a palace accustomed to routine violence, creating logistical challenges that test the organizational capabilities of palace personnel. Your own position becomes increasingly precarious as the investigation expands and the criteria for suspected involvement become broader and more arbitrary. Your regular duties in the harem quarters place you in the category of personnel who might have observed suspicious activities or been exposed to treasonous conversations. The fact that you were recently castrated and assigned to sensitive duties makes you a potential target for investigation, as authorities might suspect that new eunuchs are more likely to be involved in inappropriate relationships or security breaches. Wang, your supervisor, provides what guidance he can while also trying to protect himself from suspicion and investigation. He advises you to volunteer no information beyond direct answers to specific questions, to avoid speculation or opinion about the alleged conspiracy, and to maintain complete emotional neutrality, regardless of what you witness during the coming purge. His experience with previous palace crises has taught him that survival often depends more on appearing harmless and forgettable than on demonstrating loyalty or competence. The preparation for mass execution begins with the construction of temporary execution platforms in one of the palace courtyards, where the condemned will be killed in full view of their remaining palace personnel. The emperor has decided that the executions should serve as both punishment for the guilty and warning for the innocent, demonstrating the consequences of betraying imperial trust and violating palace protocols. The public nature of the executions is designed to maximize their psychological impact on surviving palace personnel. The method of execution chosen for this occasion is slicing, a particularly brutal form of capital punishment that involves cutting the victim's body into pieces while they are still alive. This method is reserved for the most serious crimes against imperial authority and is designed to maximize both the suffering of the victims and the deterrent effect on witnesses. The emperor's choice of this execution method reflects both his rage over the alleged betrayals and his desire to send an unmistakable message about the consequences of challenging imperial authority. The selection of victims for the mass execution includes not only the primary suspects in the alleged conspiracy, but also their servants, associates, and anyone who might have knowledge of their activities. The emperor's logic is that anyone who knew about treasonous activities and failed to report them is guilty of complicity and deserves the same punishment as the primary conspirators. This approach ensures that the scope of the executions will be much broader than the original allegations might justify, creating a purge that affects hundreds or possibly thousands of palace personnel. The Korean concubines are particularly targeted in this purge, as their foreign origins and cultural connections make them suspect in the emperor's eyes. Lady Han, who was once one of the emperor's favorites, is among those condemned to death despite limited evidence of her involvement in any conspiracy. The targeting of foreign women reflects both the emperor's paranoia about external threats and his willingness to sacrifice diplomatic relationships in favor of domestic security concerns. The atmosphere in the palace becomes increasingly surreal as preparations for the mass execution continue in palace. Personnel struggle to maintain normal routines while awaiting news of their own fates. Meals are prepared and served, cleaning duties are performed, and administrative tasks are completed by people who know they might be dead within days or hours. The contrast between ordinary palace activities and the extraordinary violence being prepared creates a sense of unreality that affects everyone's psychological state. Your own psychological condition deteriorates as you realize that your survival depends on factors completely beyond your control. The arbitrary nature of the selection process for execution means that innocence provides no protection and that your fate will be determined by the whims of investigators and the emperor's emotional state, rather than by any rational assessment of guilt or innocence. The helplessness of your situation is made worse by your isolation from family and community, as you face potential death without the comfort of familiar relationships or cultural support systems. The night before the scheduled executions, the palace takes on an atmosphere of impending apocalypse as personnel throughout the complex await dawn and the beginning of the killing. Sleep is impossible for most people, as the knowledge of what will happen the next day makes rest both physically and psychologically difficult. Conversations are limited to essential communications, as no one wants to say anything that might be misinterpreted or reported to authorities. The silence is broken only by the sound of guards moving through corridors and the occasional cry or prayer from someone who has learned of their condemnation. The emperor spends this final night in private consultations with his closest advisors and security officials, reviewing the evidence against the condemned and making final decisions about the scope and methods of the executions. According to reports that filter through the palace hierarchy, the emperor remains convinced that the conspiracy was extensive and that only brutal punishment can restore the security and sacred nature of his imperial household. His determination to proceed with the mass execution appears unshakable despite any concerns his advisors might have about the consequences. The dawn of execution day arrives with gray skies and cold air that seems to match the mood of everyone in the palace complex. The condemned are assembled in holding areas where they await transport to the execution site, while palace personnel, who will be forced to witness the killings, gather in designated viewing areas. The organization and logistics of managing such a large-scale execution require careful coordination among security personnel, executioners, and administrative staff who must document the proceedings for imperial records. You're assigned to a viewing area where junior palace personnel are required to witness the executions as part of their education in imperial justice and the consequences of disloyalty. The viewing area is positioned to provide clear sight lines to the execution platforms while maintaining sufficient distance to prevent interference with the proceedings. Guards surround the viewing areas to ensure that witnesses remain in their designated positions and display appropriate reactions to what they observe. The condemned are brought to the execution site in groups, their hands bound behind their backs and their mouths, gagged to prevent final speeches or pleas that might disrupt the proceedings. The diversity of the victims is striking, including not only the Korean and Chinese concubines, who were the primary targets of the investigation, but also dozens of eunuchs, servants, guards, and other palace personnel whose only crime was proximity to the accused conspirators. Children are among the condemned, including young servants, and even some of the emperor's own offspring, who were deemed potentially dangerous to imperial security. The executioners are skilled professionals who have been brought in specifically for this occasion, as the regular palace personnel lack the expertise and psychological conditioning necessary for conducting mass killings on this scale. These men wear ceremonial robes and carry specially designed knives that are optimized for the slicing execution method. Their faces show the professional detachment of craftsmen who understand their trade and take pride in performing it efficiently and effectively. The emperor himself observes the executions from an elevated platform that provides him with an unobstructed view of the proceedings while maintaining the ceremonial dignity appropriate to his divine status. He is dressed in robes that emphasize his imperial authority and surrounded by symbols of power that reinforce the legitimacy of the punishments being administered. His expression is described by witnesses as stern and implacable, showing no signs of mercy or regret for the suffering he has ordered. The executions begin with the reading of formal charges against each group of condemned individuals, though the noise from the crowds and the distance from the reading platform make it difficult to understand the specific accusations. The charges appear to focus on adultery, conspiracy, and treason, with additional accusations of poisoning and corruption that justify the severity of the punishments. The legal proceedings are brief and formulaic, as the verdicts have already been determined, and the purpose of the ceremony is punishment rather than adjudication. The first group of victims includes several of the Korean concubines who were at the center of the original allegations. Lady Han is among them, her dignity maintained, even in these final moments, as she faces death with the composure that made her attractive to the emperor in the first place. The slicing begins with cuts designed to cause maximum pain while prolonging life, as the executioners work systematically through each victim's body with the precision of surgeons performing delicate operations. The sounds of the executions are almost worse than the visual spectacle, as the victims' screams penetrate even the gags that were supposed to silence them. The wet sounds of blades cutting through flesh and bone create an audio backdrop that makes it impossible to ignore what is happening even if you close your eyes. The smell of blood begins to fill the air as the executions continue, creating a metallic taste that seems to coat the inside of your mouth and nose. Your own psychological state becomes increasingly dissociated as the horror of the scene overwhelms your ability to process what you're witnessing. The systematic destruction of human beings by skilled professionals creates a sense of unreality that makes it difficult to believe that what you're seeing is actually happening. Some of the other witnesses in your viewing area have begun vomiting or fainting, but the guards prevent anyone from leaving their assigned positions or looking away from the executions. The efficiency of the executioners becomes apparent as they work through the condemned groups with mechanical precision, each victim processed according to established procedures that maximize suffering while ensuring eventual death. The slicing method requires considerable skill to execute properly, as the cuts must be deep enough to cause severe pain and blood loss while avoiding immediate death from damage to vital organs. The executioners have clearly practiced their technique extensively and take professional pride in their ability to prolong the dying process. Your journey from village boy to imperial eunuch ends not with advancement or prosperity, but as a witness to the systematic slaughter of nearly 3,000 people because the emperor couldn't handle the fact that his concubines found other ways to entertain themselves. The Yongle emperor's paranoia and sexual insecurity created a massacre that made the castration process look like a minor inconvenience by comparison. Your survival depended entirely on luck and your ability to remain invisible during one of history's most brutal displays of imperial rage.